Night City may be a less than desirable place to live if you're a standard citizen, but it's also home to many of the greatest legends of the Cyberpunk universe. Most of them chromed to high heaven with insane feats of brilliance on their records, making for the most interesting people you could ever possibly meet. So, in this video, we'll be taking a detailed look at 10 of Night City's greatest legends who have absolutely earned their drinks at the afterlife. Thank you also to Rocket Money for sponsoring this video, more about that in a bit, but now let's begin with the man that Night City itself is named after. Richard Alex Knight, born in Pasadena in 1954, is the man that we could say started it all. His story is really the origin story of Night City itself, as well as everything he had to do beforehand in order to get there. As the second child of two material scientists at Caltech, Knight grew up to pursue a path in engineering, eventually teaming up with his college roommate Romney Zakarian for a joint business venture. But whilst they were still in college, the partnership between the two broke down, to such an extent that Knight shifted his major from engineering to business financial investments, arming himself with the business know-how to reclaim his company from his former friend in its entirety. Incidentally, however, now equipped with a combo of engineering and finance business expertise, Knight was primed to start a new and insanely successful business venture in the construction of mega projects. No Night City, not quite yet. The early days were mostly comprised of smaller cities, complexes and airports, which he and his new partners Halsey and Ferris were able to oversee in record time, generating insane wealth for all three. And then America began to fall apart. A series of events which themselves make up a huge piece of cyberpunk lore which we don't have time to cover in full in this video, but naturally, when a society is collapsing, it begins to implode under a combination of social and economic pressures. A huge uptick in violence and organized crime, largely exacerbated by public desperation. Knight saw this going on around him and realized he, of all people, could actually manufacture a solution. Starting up yet another company called Knight Industries, he began to plan a city designed from the start to house a mass population, free from external violence, multicultural but zoned in such a way that every culture and nationality would have a unique space that feels like home, with a giant corporate center for the world's greatest businesses to exist side by side, described in the Cyberpunk Red Core rulebook as a shining beacon to enlightened capitalism. But building such a movement was going to require perhaps more cash than any other project ever. Though Knight's track record, combined with the fact that a collapsing society meant governments kept making choices that were entirely anti-business, basically put the megacorps entirely in the place Richard Knight wanted them, looking for a clean slate to escape the cesspool of collapsing America. By 1992, Arasaka, EBM, and Petrochem had all agreed to help finance Knight's new megacity. All that was left was to find the perfect location. The area that would become Night City needed several things. The ocean, for one, to establish ports, but also modern highways linking it to the rest of the US. They'd need to ship a truly gargantuan mass of building materials both by land and sea to build this place after all. So, Knight scoured both the east and west coast before eventually settling at a place called Morro Bay. Connected by two major highways and having very little law enforcement, this place had become a hive of scum and villainy, namely for biker gangs. And thanks to said gangs famously performing huge massacres across the region, Knight was able to acquire the land for very, very cheap. Well, I assume cheap as far as connected, otherwise geographically well-placed land goes, that is. And thus, the planning of the construction for Night City began. Arasaka cleared out any remnant gangs. The law firm Merrill, Asukaga and Finch handled admin in return for a place to establish their own financial hub. And whilst Knight was indeed the instigator, the city was really a place funded and built by the megacorps for the megacorps. And with the hope of getting away from the Morro Bay Massacre Association, the place was then renamed to Del Coronado Bay. Yeah, still not Night City, not just yet. Though, even at this point, people were starting to colloquially refer to it as Knight's City, what with him being the founder and all. And have you ever wondered just why this place is so flat, so perfect for building on in 2077? Well, that's because Richard Knight had the closest surrounding hills completely leveled, and the material then dumped into the ocean, expanding the spit of land to accommodate Watson, Haywood, and Pacifica, with each region specifically designed to suit its own theme, meant to reflect regions of both the east and west coast, with Knight himself showing off his personal architectural visions through the high-rise buildings established in city centre. Just a shame that actually building the damn thing would be what ultimately spelled his downfall. See, Petrochem and Merrill, Asukaga and Finch may have been putting forward the majority of the funds, but they themselves were not construction companies. They had no equipment nor expertise in that regard. Unfortunately, the people they then wound up subcontracting for this were the mob. The mafia, the yakuza, all the classic ones you've actually heard of in real life. This part of cyberpunk history is actually still somewhat similar to our own. At this point, especially what with America's downfall, the mob had infiltrated pretty much every union and agency involved in city construction. And much as Knight wanted a city free of crime, he couldn't really build it without employing criminals, though he did still do his best to keep their more nefarious operations out of his city. Plus, many of the advanced buildings he wanted made needed very specialist construction, leaving in places many of the mob-controlled unions and firms out of the picture. And for the next 4 years, from 1994 to 1998, whilst Coronado City continued its construction, Richard Knight received death threats on the daily, and for 4 years, he largely ignored or hired corporate protection to deflect these attempts on his life. For 4 years, he was successful in this, until September 20th, 1998, where he wasn't. Shot and killed in his own penthouse apartment by somebody who was never apprehended, Coronado City was then officially renamed Night City in its now late founder's honor. But that didn't stop the mob from immediately filling the power void and transforming the place back into the antithesis of what Knight had imagined. An overflowing drug den run by criminals where nobody in their right mind, especially families and people just wanting a relatively normal life, would ever dare move to. Basically like the slum parts of Night City in 2077, but everywhere. Though, by 2009, after a huge effort to take back their business haven, the megacorps, largely Arasaka forces on the ground, took back Night City in the name of corporate business. You likely know a lot of the rest of the in-between: the fall of the First Net and Arasaka Tower, the Time of Red, leading to the Night City of 2077, where the streets are still largely controlled by gangs, but the megacorps arguably control the gangs themselves, as well as just generally the citizens. Though even after nearly 80 years, there is still an active effort to deliver on Knight's perfect vision. Knight Corp was also founded in Richard Knight's name by his widowed wife, Miriam. Easily and deliberately the most shady and elusive corporation in Night City, seemingly with the sole loyalty to the welfare of the city itself. Not necessarily the individual citizens, just the city as a whole. And given their way, Knight Corp would simply tap into the very minds of their own citizens, reprogramming them to become utterly compliant, law-abiding, dedicated workers who do exactly what the mastermind at the top of this company wants them to do. We don't know if Miriam Knight is still alive, though that's very much within the realms of possibility, but she did step down as CEO a long time ago, leaving perhaps Mr. Blue Eyes as the mysterious guy in charge, or at least the only face of the company we ever really see now, in the shadows occasionally. Is it possible that Richard Knight's consciousness survived, still carrying out his vision through the proxy of Mr. B? Well, probably not if he died in 1998. Soulkiller wasn't finished until the 2010s, so as far as everything we know is concerned, that wouldn't be possible. That is, unless Knight didn't die in 1998. And who knows if the killing was actually staged, just to get the mob to stop hunting him. It's possible, perhaps, possible that somehow Richard Knight returned, but we'll have to wait for future cyberpunk projects to shine a light on this theory more. For now, Richard Knight's story is the construction of Night City, and that alone is one hell of a legacy, cementing Richard Knight as one of the first, if not the first, great Night City legend. But if there's one thing that Night City does well, it's encouraging you to spend money. With hundreds of ads flying past every minute, how could you not sign up for a handful of subscriptions here and there, before ultimately forgetting to cancel them over and over and over again? And believe me, that's easily done. But that brings me on to today's video sponsor, Rocket Money, an all-in-one personal finance app that helps you cancel subscriptions, lower your bills, and all round just manage your money better. With Rocket Money linked to your bank account, you'll get a clear and itemized list of everything you're subscribed to. From there, you can cancel the ones you don't want anymore, and in many cases, Rocket Money can even do this for you, with just a few taps. No more accidentally renewing for an additional month, or I actually get caught out more by the yearly subscriptions. I mean, there's such a long gap in between them, literally a year, and the cost is also usually a lot higher. So, Rocket Money is great for ensuring you're notified of these ahead of time and setting up a budget to help you more accurately track your spending. So, check it out via the link in the description or the QR on screen to get started for free, with even more features available in the premium version. Huge thank you again to Rocket Money for sponsoring this video, and now it's back to Night City. And who better to cover next than an undisputed legend that everybody knows and loves? Well, unless you're in any way affiliated with Arasaka. Johnny Silverhand might be to us the problematic engram in our head come 2077, but his 34 years of actual life was certainly eventful too. Born on November 16th, 1988, Silverhand's real name was actually Robert John Linder, a fact also verified by his plaque at the Columbarium, which sits right next to Old Cunningham's. But we're getting way ahead of ourselves. As a teenager, we could say that Johnny was the antithesis to who he is today. So determined to do good for the powers that be in his country, Johnny enlisted in the military when he was just a teenager, lying about his age to get in, seeing conflict during the time of the Second Central American War in 2003. So he'd have been, just 15 or 16. On the face of it, this war was about dealing with the Central American drug cartels. But actually, in lieu of a very much now collapsed US states, it was really just a land grab and an attempt by those in charge to continue clinging on to power. Corruption initially masked by patriotism. During this war, Johnny would lose his arm, and according to his engram, had a friend die to protect him. The first of these events resulted in Johnny receiving his now iconic cybernetic arm, which ironically was made by Arasaka, though it's also likely that his new chrome rendered Johnny a functioning cyber psycho from there on, which would explain a lot of his future behavior. Ultimately, when the true nature of this war came to light for the soldiers dying in it, many, including Johnny, rebelled by packing up and deserting. For about a month after arriving home, Johnny stayed then in Pacifica, staring at the ceiling in a hotel called the Pistis Sophia, a place that V will also be taken by his engram, and where we can recover a set of dog tags that Johnny stashed here. According to him, these belonged to a man who sacrificed himself for Johnny. Yet, if we actually read their inscription, the tags bear Johnny's own name of Robert John Linder. Now, this is either a classic case of Johnny's engram misremembering something that crops up time and again throughout the game, or it's more of a metaphor for the fact that a part of Johnny, his left arm, but also perhaps his sanity, died back in the war. And indeed, after arriving home, this was when Robert John Linder officially changed his name to Johnny Silverhand, pledging the rest of his life thereafter to exposing corruption, rebelling against the corpo elites, and inspiring those around him to stand up to their oppressors. So he teamed up with his best friend Kerry Eurodyne, and the two began playing gigs in clubs and bars around Night City, with their very first being in an arroyo dive called Red Dirt, which in 2077 will poetically be the last place they play as well. But the name Samurai, they'd come to be known as, was actually chosen by Nancy, their keyboardist, noting Johnny's willingness to absolutely die for his cause no matter what, and likening it to historical samurai's code of honor. Johnny and Kerry, though, just agreed that it was a very cool name, which, to be fair, yeah, it is. Within the same year of 2003, Samurai were picked up by an executive named Jack Masters of Universal Music whilst they were playing in the Japantown club Rainbow Cadenza, another venue we'll go and visit in 2077, only this time to learn that it's been transformed into a ramen shop during the Ballad of Buck Raver's quest. But in 2003, it was the place from which Samurai would go on to become a global hit, reaching #1 on the Euro charts just 3 weeks later with their single Blistering Love. In the years that followed, Johnny and the band toured across the world, selling out at Wembley Stadium and many other prestigious venues, and releasing 6 albums in total. For the first 4 years, things were going great. That was until 2007, when Nancy got married to an abusive husband, which which ended when she threw him out of their 83rd story window. She got 7 months behind bars, and when she got out, the band had moved on from being an unbreakable unit, officially bringing their partnership to a close and ending the Samurai glory days, with Johnny going on to pursue a largely solo career. Though I think there's likely a chance they did reunite for at least some gigs. Indeed, we see in the Never Fade Away flashback Samurai playing a gig in 2013 and again during Love Like Fire in 2023, literally just before the fall of Arasaka Tower. And whilst it's almost certain that these are cases of Johnny's engram heavily misremembering, especially the 2023 one, it's still possible that they might have all reunited for the odd gig like this. I mean, Johnny and Kerry certainly did, and in 2012, those two even purchased a club called the Grand Illusion, where not only would the two go on to perform most of their own gigs, but they also provided a place where other artists, both established and up and coming, could further grow their careers too. Johnny, it seemed, loved to inspire others to become rockers as well, a thing that he may even go on to continue to do in 2077, depending on how the game ends. But jumping back, for the most part, the next 15 years after Samurai broke up mainly involved Johnny going solo, still with the underlying goal of inspiring the masses to rebel against the corpse, during which time he released the album Sins of Your Brothers, where he told the story of the conflict he fought in, explaining that he had deserted, but also why, something that seems to only make people more sympathetic towards his cause. He also, during this time, began and ended his relationship with Rogue, another Great Night City legend who we'll cover later. But aside from never taking her to a drive-in movie date, despite Rogue asking him to multiple times, she eventually ended things in 2011 after finding out that Johnny had been cheating on her. Though, even then, the feelings she held for Johnny Silverhand never truly faded away. And where things really began to heat up for Johnny was in 2013, when another girlfriend, or I suppose also ex-girlfriend by that point, Alt Cunningham, was kidnapped and held prisoner by Arasaka. You'll no doubt know the basics of this story well, given we play it in the quest Never Fade Away. Alt is taken to complete her work on Soulkiller, and Johnny, already bearing a massive grudge against Arasaka, rallies Rogue, Nomad Santiago, the former, or at this point future, leader of the Aldecaldos, and Thompson, a media, to lead an assault on the tower and rescue Alt, diverting most of the building security outside by calling Samurai together once again to play a free concert at the base of the tower, rallying a massive crowd and, from how it looks here at least, starting a riot. Unfortunately, in his own desperation to rescue Alt, Johnny would be the one to ultimately kill her, or at least her physical body. And in the events that we experience during the flashback, Alt appears entirely helpless until Johnny and co storm in. But actually, from inside the net, she'd already taken control of this room, eliminating all of the guards herself. And she would likely have escaped entirely on her own. Sadly, Johnny unplugged her before she had time to safely disconnect her consciousness from net space, severing mind and body forever. After this, forced into hiding, both Johnny and Santiago joined up with the Aldecaldos, who at the time were based down in Mexico, and Johnny wouldn't return to Night City until 2015, at which point he immediately got back to work playing gigs to draw attention to corporate and government atrocities. Sometime between this point and 2023, Johnny would likely have been surprised to have been contacted by Alt Cunningham, who it turned out wasn't quite dead, but her mind was still trapped inside Arasaka's subnet, left there since 2013 when Johnny severed her mind and body. Luckily for Johnny, the world was in the midst of the Fourth Corporate War. Arasaka and Militech were engaged in conflict, with the latter megacorp more than happy to assist Johnny in yet another assault on Arasaka Tower. And this would involve a team-up of a number of characters we'll be covering in this video, such as Rogue, Shaitan, and Morgan Blackhand, whose exact roles we'll explore more later. All we need to know for now is that unlike the flashback sequence that we play, Johnny is not in fact there to do everything pretty much entirely solo. In fact, the planting of the bomb and facing Adam Smasher on the rooftop was actually the domain of Morgan Blackhand, and Johnny was in fact only there once again to rescue Alt and serve as a distraction, an objective that he, aided by Rogue, Shaitan, and Spider Murphy as a team, almost completed successfully, with Spider actually managing to pull Alt out of the net. But at that very moment, Adam Smasher stormed into the room, and in an act of heroic self-sacrifice, much more so than the engram remembers, Johnny chose to face down Smasher, thinking to himself, whilst crouched behind cover, "I left Alt last time, just abandoned her." Not again, not ever. Then in his head comes a reply, which he tends to imagine comes from his cybernetic hands. "Better to burn out," it said. To which Johnny agreed. Dual-wielding his Malorian and Militech SMG, Johnny opened fire, only to be immediately cut in two by Adam Smasher's shotgun. But this sacrifice gives them the moment they need. The much more bogged-out Shaitan then grapples with Adam Smasher, buying Rogue, Spider-Murphy, and Thompson time to flee. And in fact, in this version of events, it's not Arasaka who downloaded Johnny's engrammatic data just before he died, but rather Spider-Murphy, in the very moment before she flees, ramming a data shard into the back of his skull, securing his future as an engram. At least that's how the sourcebooks tell it, and I'm willing to bet that that's going to probably be the more accurate version of events. But it is an undeniable fact that Johnny's engram would eventually wind up in the hands of Arasaka, which to be fair is more simply explained by the flashback. Then again, 54 years is a very long time, and there's plenty of ways that Spider's copy of Johnny could have wound up back in Arasaka's hands. All we know is that by 2077, Yorinobu has successfully downloaded Johnny's engram onto the biochip that he stole from his father. And hey, we know that Yorinobu is secretly no friend to Arasaka, so who's to say he didn't actually procure the engram from Spider herself? It's a very loose theory, and there's probably concrete evidence to discredit it, but let me know down in the comments what you think of that. In the 50 years following on from Johnny's death, his status as Night City legend became undeniable. To this day, he still has a drink at the afterlife, though the names Silverhand and Samurai tend to mainly be thrown around by those old enough to remember their music nowadays. Though people do still wonder if Johnny survived the Arasaka Tower bombing, with the fact that he was even behind it just a theory. And the common "Where's Johnny" graffiti is a lot more than just a Shining reference. People do remember, and in fact, in the game files, we can even find cut dialogue from Maximum Mike's radio show where viewers would often call in with their own Johnny Silverhand sightings. So he of course gets a bump up in legend status due to his engram's presence in 2077, but prior to that even, Johnny Silverhand was, through and through, one of the greatest legends Night City has ever known. Next up is a legend that we won't hear too much about in 2077, but Jackie does mention his name on our first visit to the afterlife. Andrew Boa Boa Weyland was the leader of a group called the Water Leopards, a Black Ops unit who originally worked freelance before eventually becoming a long-standing key part of Petrochem's military forces. Hailing from Jamaica, Weyland would employ methods based on Rastafarian mysticism to terrorize his enemies in battle. Rastafarian mysticism, by the way, is basically this idea of divinity within each person, a thing that one can access through introspection, meditation, and ultimately pursuing a natural lifestyle where spiritual freedom and interconnection with the rest of the world is more important than material gain. This, therefore, is a man who didn't do his work purely for money, but also genuinely enjoyed the killing aspect, in an almost respectable but certainly quite twisted way, with assassinations and, to be fair, also extractions being his favorite types of op. He was so skilled, in fact, that the Water Leopards were renowned for never having failed a job. He also, back in the day, went toe-to-toe with Morgan Blackhand and survived. Now, that's a guy who successfully fought Adam Smasher atop Arasaka Tower, but we'll discuss that more later in the video. Point is that Boa Boa 2 is a force to be reckoned with, and that nickname, Boa Boa, very much has meaning behind it too. Now, we don't see reptilian synth skin all that much around Night City. I think there's a couple animals you may come across that have it, but this is something that Andrew Weyland went all in on, covering his body in a snakeskin pattern, as well as implanting the signature yellow eyes of the Water Leopards. Now, just imagine being a target of Weyland's, seeing a pair of yellow eyes appear out of the darkness before being jumped by what would look at first like a snake. Indeed, in the couple seconds you probably have left to live, you may only have time to process the fact that you seem to be being killed by a giant snake. Though it does also sound like Weyland enjoyed tormenting his enemies a little first. All we know about Weyland in 2077 though is that he is dead. We don't know when that happened, but his plaque can be found in the columbarium, reading he tried to shape reality at a lethal cost. And the only things we know from earlier lore is that Weyland aspired to one day command all of Petrochem's forces. We don't know if that ever happened, but we do know that the Water Leopards didn't have a great relationship with other units in Petrochem's forces. And there was also the suggestion that the Water water leopards might actually go back to freelancing, after 2 of their original 12 were killed thanks to corpo infighting and faulty intel. So maybe Boa Boa either attempted to assert more control within Petrochem, or just made a move to leave, shaping reality to what he wanted, and the Corp then had to put him down. Weyland also of course though had a son, Crispin, who, if you've played the game ending involving Rogue, you'll be familiar with. And I've often thought that Crispin Weyland, alongside us, successfully facing down Adam Smasher was potentially unrealistic. But if Crispin's anything like his father, then it all makes a lot more sense. And if Arasaka's special unit is Adam Smasher and Militech's is Morgan Blackhand, then Andrew Boa Boa Weyland is probably the same for Petrochem. Rogue Amendiares. To be honest, I still don't know if that's how you pronounce her last name. Most notably, Rogue was one of the greatest mercenaries in Night City, now turned fixer, and also of course the former lover of Johnny Silverhand. Growing up as a street kid, Rogue always knew that a gang life in the gutter wasn't for her. So she took a risk, started doing work as a solo, and turned out to be a very good one. The street cred this afforded her may then be what drove her and Johnny Silverhand to meet to begin with, what with both being renowned individuals in Night City. Again though, Rogue ended things with him in 2011 after she found out Johnny was cheating. And yet, it's very clear that she would never fully get over him, diving into hell, or more accurately Arasaka Tower for him, every time Johnny simply asked. In the Cyberpunk Red sourcebook, when Johnny appears to her at the Atlantis 2 years after their breakup, where he's now asking for help rescuing Alt, it says, quote, "After all this time, Rogue still can't decide whether she wants him or just wants to kill him." End quote. That's a theme and a feeling that's going to continue for a further 64 years. Now, we already covered this entire tale in the Johnny chapter, so I won't repeat it again, but after this op was done, after Rogue saw firsthand just how much Johnny cared about Alt, how grieved he was to lose her, I think it helped her move on a little. At some point after 2013, Rogue apparently also had a brief relationship with Morgan Blackhand, but it seems the main guy she moved on with was Nomad Santiago. We'll be covering his story in this video too, but the main thing to note between these two is that there's a very high chance they had a son together. And we know Santiago's son to be a guy called Trace Santiago, a media largely active in 2045 and part of the Black Dog Edge Runner crew. But we also know that Rogue 2 has a son who she mentions very briefly to Johnny in their 2077 ending. Now, I've just recently done a very big deep dive into the hidden secrets of all the game's endings, which you can find down below, and one theory I discussed there is that Trace Santiago and Rogue's unnamed son are actually the same person. There's lots more evidence as to why in that video, but I think the main confirmation is Mike Pondsmith himself, commenting on the Cyberpunk game subreddit that this very likely is the case, but he still needs to figure out how to write it properly into the story and lore. Rogue also of course followed Johnny to Arasaka Tower once again in 2023, where she witnessed the rocker boy die. And while Spider Murphy moved towards his body, it was Rogue that more quickly chose acceptance, stating simply that he was gone before helping the others escape to the AV on the roof. Again, not quite how we see it in the flashback, but still similar enough that Rogue might have some residual guilt for leaving Johnny, though not nearly as much guilt as she'd be forced to live with later for betraying his memory. See, after the tower bombing, Rogue had become a natural enemy to Arasaka, yet come the time of 2077, she is running the most prestigious Edge Runner bar in Night City with no attempt by any corporation to shut her down. And she must have managed this by first striking a deal with them, the details of which are never laid out in full, but we do know that it involved working with Adam Smasher, literally Johnny's killer, as well as Jeremiah Grayson, given he recognizes her when the two reunite in 2077.
Oh my, Rogue. You and me not playing for the same team anymore? Ever wonder how Rogue survived after the attack on the tower? How in hell no one ever hunted her down?
Admittedly though, if she hadn't done this, she'd have been in no position to potentially help Johnny out once again later on. So I guess that should maybe factor into the judgment of all this. Her main time as a fixer, the queen of fixers then, would come sometime before 2045, where a car accident wound up injuring Rogue so badly that despite all the advancements in medical cyberware, she could never be fully fixed. And though she still proves to be a very competent solo when accompanying us on a number of occasions, her life doing that on a day-to-day forcibly came to a close. So she repositioned herself and levied her numerous established contacts to ensure the afterlife and those who worked out of it could become a truly influential force across Night City, with her in the center organizing the biggest gigs and handling the fixer politics that ultimately comes with this, ensuring a healthy coexistence with the likes of Wakako and many others. By 2077, she'd put together an excellent team of staff to support her. Nyx is unquestionably one of the best netrunners in Night City, and if we recruit his help during Phantom Liberty, he'll get the job done quicker than anyone else could have. Crispin Weyland is, as established, the son of one of the most skilled and renowned legends of all time. Emmerich Bronson has the animals build perfect for a bouncer, but is also helpful in liaising with contacts, and Claire is a bartender that knows Night City's history and has a good memory for the drinks of every deceased legend, memorizing Jackie's drink, for instance, after just one conversation. But also by 2077, Rogue appears to have established a fine line between business and principle. It's not entirely about money for her, though she doesn't tend to sympathize with clients who are bad for business, explaining to us after our botched heist at Konpeki Plaza that other mercs would now be unwilling to work with us. At the same time, she later issues a number of side gigs purely to help old friends or those less fortunate in society, sending us to recover some bootlegged samurai gear on behalf of Nancy, whom Rogue will no doubt have gotten to know through Johnny, and sending us to take out the head of a private security company designed to crush trade unions, a pro bono thing organized entirely by her. Of course, Rogue goes even more above and beyond when Johnny walks back into the picture, first agreeing to assault with us, Adam Smasher's ship, the Ebonike, and later, if Johnny finally takes her on that drive-in date she requested so many years ago, proving he actually has changed a fair bit, Rogue will, for the third time in her life, agree to assault Arasaka Tower with Johnny, if we choose to allow him to do so at the end, that is. Again, I break down all the details of that in my video, The Hidden Secrets of All Main Endings in Cyberpunk 2077. But for the most part, Rogue's story is about her rise from renowned merc to Queen of Fixers. Whilst in the past, her association with famous men like Johnny, Blackhand, and Santiago is said to have overshadowed people recognizing her own skills, she is literally kept out of the top 10 solo lists largely for this reason. Her presence during multiple events which reshaped the course of history, plus her status in 2077, more than make her one of the greatest legends to have ever lived in Night City. And of all the men in Rogue's life, the one that seems on balance to be most deserving of her is Nomad Santiago, who'd go on to eventually become Santiago Aldecaldo, their leader for a time, who largely led the clan to become what we know it as in 2077. Originally from Los Angeles, Santiago would spend much of his early life moving around. Starting off in an army hospital near Berlin, Santiago's actual family was already very large, with many cousins and people to care for. Eventually, Santiago and his family returned to the States around the same time that the US collapsed, leading to an event called the Lawyer's Purge. And with Santiago's father being a lawyer, this was the point when the family were forced to abandon regular society and join an early nomad community. The constant changes that came with this type of life made Santiago particularly resilient to change. Couple that with being unusually small throughout his childhood, and by the time he was a grown man, Santiago had become both very adaptable and very resilient. Before turning 19 though, he decided to leave his early version of a nomad family, pursuing various jobs as a soldier, a bodyguard, and a roadie for bands, the latter of which would ultimately result in Santiago crossing paths with rogue Amendiares. And after the two proved to work well together, they quickly became regular business partners, working gigs out of the Atlantis in Night City. Throughout this time, Santiago continually tried to make passes at Rogue, which is possibly a reason he stuck around her so much, not getting what he wanted, but since she still wasn't over Johnny, she kept things professional. And in 2013, when Johnny reappears pitching the gig to rescue Alt, it's actually Santiago who cuts through Alt's personal feelings and purely focuses on biz, happening more or less as we see in the flashback.
Pays double your standard rate.
Triple it. And you come with us now.
We've already been over that whole op in this video, but after the group had thoroughly pissed off Arasaka, all were forced into hiding for a couple years, with Johnny and Santiago again joining the Aldecaldos down in Mexico. And for this nomad, it would be his very making. And likely through a combination of his background, carefully maintained appearance and fashion sense, and most importantly the way he inspired those around him, Santiago was quickly earning the respect of the Aldecaldo clan, inspiring them to reach for a clearly envisioned better life that all could aspire to. This eventually brought him face to face with the now very old leader and original founder named Juan Aldecaldo, who definitely deserves to be covered in full for another video at some point. He led an incredibly tragic but nonetheless inspiring life, and seeing Santiago convey a similar inspiration, he gave the man a task to help the Aldecaldo clan so that they could help others. Soon afterwards, Santiago was made the new leader of the Aldecaldos, taking on Juan's namesake out of respect and understanding for the weight that came with it. And in 2015, Santiago led the Aldecaldos out of Mexico and back to the US. 2 years later, in Omaha, with nomad lifestyle becoming a lot more established across the US, numbering in the millions now, many of the smaller clans came together to discuss uniting into larger groups, what would become known across the US as the Seven Nations, who, it's rumored, when united, could hold back literally anyone, save for a band called the White Stripes. During this event, Santiago's call for others to join the Aldecaldo clan was so successful that they wound up becoming the second largest group of nomads out of the seven, beaten only by Snake Nation. Fast forward to 2077, and after becoming aware of Santiago during the flashback, V can also directly ask Saul about him, who's a fair bit more reserved in his opinions about the man, admitting he was right for the time and place, but wound up too torn between his family and those he was loyal to in Night City, before implying something a little odd.
Doesn't loyalty to your friends count for something?
Maybe it does, but then you end up like Santiago. He snuffed it because some lunatic wanted to blow Arasaka to smithereens. What a friend.
Now, he snuffed it absolutely implies that Santiago died during the tower bombing, except Santiago was never at Arasaka Tower in 2023. He was busy taking care of the family, choosing the very thing Saul criticized Santiago for not focusing on enough. Santiago, in fact, sent the Lobos, the Aldecaldo wolves, to aid in his stead. But okay, maybe what Saul means is because Santiago involved the Aldecaldos in the tower bombing, Arasaka eventually came for him out of revenge. I mean, it could have happened years later, though I'd wager there's still an equal chance that Santiago was merely forced to step down as the Aldecaldo leader and go underground, perhaps even making the world believe he was dead to get Arasaka off his back. This is because of a shard in the afterlife, found in Rogue's room and addressed to her, clearly from Santiago, who says that he stopped by the afterlife but couldn't bring himself to head inside. Now, maybe it's an old shard that Rogue has kept hold of for many years, but it at least suggests that Santiago was still alive since Rogue has owned the afterlife. I mean, I don't know. There seems to be a lot of conflicting evidence around this, and I've checked through most of the lore books as research for this video to try and get all the information possible, but if anyone watching does have more concrete evidence on Santiago's fate, then please do comment it below. Though a final big thing suggesting he is indeed alive is due to not having a drink in the afterlife. I mean, there's absolutely no question that he is a Night City legend, and if he was dead, you would expect at least a mention of his afterlife drink. Of all the legends on this list, Kerry Eurodyne is one we'll get to know better than most. Born on April 7th, 1988, the same year as Johnny Silverhand was, Kerry's fame began as Samurai's second guitarist and lead vocalist alongside Johnny. While Silverhand played with the underlying desire to start a revolution, Kerry was a little more reserved. Whilst yes, he still wanted to change the world through his music, Eurodyne had more care over the art itself, the value and sanctity of it, as opposed to using it as a weapon against corporate corruption. And multiple times through Samurai's core tenure up to 2007, Johnny and Kerry clashed in their ideals, and try as he might for many years to leave the band and strike out on his own, something always drew Kerry back to Samurai and to Silverhand. Perhaps therefore, Nancy's temporary imprisonment in 2007, which ultimately broke the band up, was the larger push Kerry needed to forge ahead into the solo musician scene. But even then, Kerry could not keep himself away from Silverhand. And it's never too explicitly stated in-game, but Kerry's continued attachment to his louder yelling bandmates largely came out of unrequited love. In fact, that's likely the very reason in 2077 that Kerry is willing to pursue a relationship with a male V and not a female one. Being with a male V, Kerry feels like he's finally getting what he wants with Johnny, in a kind of strange way. Though that's a Kerry topic I explore in much more detail in my video All Romances Ranked Worst to Best. But back to the stories that made him a legend, and in 2012, despite being broken up as a band, Johnny and Kerry purchased the Grand Illusion Club together, a move to further their own careers and that of other musicians, which we looked at back in the Johnny chapter. And in the years that followed, the two maintained a, shall we say, tumultuous relationship. That was until Johnny's death in 2023, which sent Kerry down a big spiral. On the surface, Kerry had lost his bandmate, which was hard enough, but underneath, something he wouldn't speak about publicly, Kerry had lost the man for whom he had the strongest feelings. Some negative, of course, namely when it came to professional career stuff, but plenty of love and longing in there too. But after a few years of difficult grieving and adjusting to what it meant for Kerry to be an entirely solo act in a world without Johnny Silverhand, he finally emerged once again, flying higher than he ever had before. Admittedly, he also made some life choices over the years that perhaps didn't suit him brilliantly, namely marrying a woman called Louise Nordin Eurodyne, much to the surprise of many of those close to him. And together they had 2 children, before eventually, perhaps inevitably, getting divorced years later. Louise did get to keep their house in Tokyo, as well as custody of their 2 children, so a pretty cushy life for them, no doubt. I mean, there are certainly worse situations to be in. Though it did also result in Kerry having an estranged relationship with his kids. He'd send presents and things, but personal time together didn't really seem on the cards all too much. This in itself didn't seem to faze Kerry as much as you might expect though. With no family to need to spend time with and a huge villa to sprawl about up in Norfolk, Kerry had all the time in the world to focus on what he'd been doing best for decades now, making excellent music. Except, after a while, living at the very height of society in one of the best, if not the best house in Night City, Kerry did begin to succumb to loneliness. His manager at MSM ensured that all the money in the world kept flowing, but after 50 years in the business, Kerry had no doubt become numb to that luxury. All of his closest friends had moved on, and try as he might to buy the company of people he likes, such as a guy named Ariel Velasco, offering pretty much any job to come and work in his villa, Kerry still ended up spending most of his time alone. And as the years went by and Johnny's memory faded further and further into legend, Kerry began to develop an obsession with comparing his own legacy to Silverhand's. Exploring around his villa, we can get a sense of what Kerry now reads in 2077, mostly screen sheets relating to himself, but more specifically the ones about him and Silverhand's. So to get an idea, here's a couple of excerpts. Eurodyne, the unauthorized biography. Samurai never achieved major commercial success because the voice that directed the group's trajectory was that of demagogue frontman Silverhand rather than that of Eurodyne, whose main aspiration was the pursuit of the music itself. Silverhand never possessed grand ambitions for creative expression. Instead, he was hell-bent on a personal path to destruction. The Last Rocker Boy, the solo career of Kerry Eurodyne. Kerry's effortless, natural charisma and strong stage presence electrify crowds without fail. By comparison, Silverhand's fiery shouts and political grandstanding appear now as nothing more than ordinary attention-grabbing, designed to mask the otherwise pedestrian quality of his musical talent. Samurai swords crossed. Kerry always returned to the samurai fold. Why? Here we enter the realm of pure rumor and gossip, the most interesting of which pegs Kerry's drama as the oldest, simplest story in the book. Love. And finally we have Kerry Eurodyne's second conflict, new album review. Eurodyne can't seem to climb out of Silverhand's shadow, and honestly, it doesn't seem like he wants to. He's still basking in the memories of decades-old scandals because he just can't seem to put together a headline of his own these days. End all quotes. So a lot of conflicting opinions here, with many saying Eurodyne has surpassed Samurai, suggesting that Johnny was even holding him back, a theory that is probably true to some extent. Then also discussing that Kerry was in love with Silverhand, as well as negative pieces implying he still hasn't escaped Silverhand's shadow. And where once Kerry might have been immune to what's written in the screen sheets, a life alone, with time in abundance and a near endless supply of varying media written about you, will understandably start to take its toll. and Johnny specifically requests that we reunite with his old friend after spotting rumors that Kerry attempted to end his own life. And later, asking Kerry about this, he shrugs them off. But it's quite clear by his expression that there is a glint of truth there. Kerry had slowly been descending back into the depressive state he'd found himself in after Johnny's death, with conflicted feelings about it all and a complete lack of closure. In the end, it's by incredible luck and excellent timing that Kerry is able to get exactly what he needs from Johnny, that closure that's eluded him for 54 years. And that's the whole reason we gather the band back together, returning to the Red Dirt Bar where Samurai played their first gig, and poetically tying things up with the last one. At this point, the problems stemming from Kerry's past were pretty much dealt with. At least they mostly were. The whole romance thing, I think, proves that Kerry will always slightly want more from Johnny than he ever could have had. After that, it's simply a case of helping Kerry move forward into the future. His initial fury at Uscrax performing a laser pop cover of one of his songs suggests again that Kerry is a little stuck in the past, not allowing his music to be reimagined in a way popular with the largest audiences of 2077. And whilst that in itself can be commendable, not wanting your creations to become tarnished in a way you ultimately disapprove of, with our help, Kerry can learn that there's a better way to combine the classic voice of the rocker boy with the very different tone of Uscrax, putting the two together into something both audiences can perhaps appreciate. You can hear the result off the leash on the in-game radio. So whilst many legends on this list are bygones, men and women from the glory days who are now either retired or have afterlife drinks, Kerry is a guy whose career still seems to have plenty of juice to keep going. Jumping forward to 2079, where Kerry will be a 91-year-old man, he's blasted off into space to play at the Crystal Palace, something he's always wanted to do. And I think there's even a bit of a pattern forming here, to explain the difference between legends that continue for a long time and those who don't. Every new era of Kerry Eurodyne has been iterated by an ability and willingness to change and evolve. Just as Rogue switched from Merc to Fixer after her accident, Kerry successfully went from Samurai to a solo career to successfully navigating the death of Johnny to eventually learning to work with new popular forms of music. And it's for these reasons that Kerry Eurodyne not only is, but will still remain, hopefully for some time yet, a one-of-a-kind Night City legend. And now we come back to another legend of the past. Susan Forrest is arguably the greatest legend ever to be produced by the NCPD, working during the 2010s as an operative for MaxTac, who, as we know, are deployed only to deal with 5-star threats in Night City. On a daily basis, Susan came face to face with a high chance of death, but being one of the most heavily armed people in America, probably even in the whole world, certainly tipped the scales in her favor. Eventually, her luck ran out, however, as she was seriously injured in a firefight. But thanks to her track record and extraordinary battle prowess, this only served to push Susan into an even higher position, becoming the state executioner for the entirety of Northern California. Safer than a job with MaxTac? Sure. Better paid? Almost definitely, but Susan was still tasked with pursuing highly dangerous individuals who were under sentence of death, as well as administering close-range executions, supervising security on death row, and all round just being the one to legally pull the trigger on anybody the state had deemed no longer allowed to stay alive. Heavily job-focused, Susan is renowned for maintaining a rational level head when at work and has no time to suffer punks, taking great pride in her job and pursuing escapees with an unrelenting determination. In the field, she usually carries an assault rifle equipped with a grenade launcher, 1 or 2 sidearms, and an SMG. So definitely prepared for all occasions, unless, I don't know, she needed to snipe someone. I mean, she might still get away with that with the assault rifle there, and if it was scoped and semi-automatic, perhaps? Anyway, Susan's renowned toughness is also what earned her an entry in the annual Top 10 Solos of Fortune back in 2020, where they again commend the zeal with which she hunts and kills fugitives, describing it as a religious level of dedication. But they also don't understate her good looks, saying it's the only thing that compares to the number of executions under her belt, which last year was 20, so are they calling Susan a 20? I mean, that would at least be one positive for anyone executed by her, but I guess is still small consolation when you're dead. But looks aside, it's undoubtedly mainly Susan's sheer skill and dedication to her job that get her a mention from Jackie the first time we visit the afterlife.
Can you imagine Susan Forrest, Boa Boa,
Hey.
even Morgan Blackhand.
Indeed, by 2077, Susan's status is unknown, and as far as I'm aware, this is the only time she's mentioned in-game. It's not entirely clear whether she has her own drink here, which would be pretty conclusive, but it's likely either that, or she's now retired to something a little quieter, same as most of the heavy action folks from that era. Another of the legends famously present during the fall of Arasaka Tower in 2023 is Shaitan, a character who, in Johnny's memory, is taken out almost immediately, painting Johnny again more as the solo hero than he actually, in reality, was. And if Johnny's role in the memory of that op overshadows Shaitan's in the game, then so too does his hatred of Arasaka. Johnny may have a strong and unrelenting grudge against the Megacorp, but that is nothing compared to Shaitan's single-minded focus on destroying Arasaka until every tiny piece of them is wiped from the earth. Becoming a full Borg Black Ops specialist, giving up his organic body to better take on the Corp, Shaitan only took jobs that would be a net negative against Arasaka, looking for things that would enable him to inflict major collateral damage, and sometimes even altering gigs to enable him to cause further destruction of Arasaka property. He outright refuses to use any product produced by Arasaka, and refuses to work with those who do. Johnny's arm is presumably an exception. Not only that, but outside of Ops 2, Shaitan dedicates his spare time to destroying anything owned by Saburo as well. Literally, his only goal, his only focus in life is to fuck up Arasaka. But for a vendetta to be so strong, so all-consuming, there has to be something terrible behind it. And whilst nobody knows for sure, it's rumored that Saburo himself once violated Shaitan's mother, or another close female relative, sparking in Shaitan a fire that will not go out until Arasaka, and more specifically everything Saburo holds dear, is burned to the ground. A solo vendetta so driven by hatred that it could be funny were Shaitan not so very successful, and his renown, especially for anti-Arasaka work, spread far and wide, making him of course a top choice in 2023 for the op in Arasaka Tower, where Shaitan wasn't incapacitated immediately before they've even departed the chopper, but accompanies Johnny, Rogue, Spider-Murphy and Thompson down to the data term where they rescue Alt. After Johnny's sacrifice, Shaitan then proves willing to follow suit, and despite Smasher heavily wounding him in hand-to-hand and winning the fight, Shaitan incredibly manages to survive the tower's collapse. And in events that followed, Shaitan then accompanied both Rogue and Spider-Murphy once again to track down Saburo's eldest son, Kei Arasaka, aboard his ship, the Sea Viper, where Spider convinces Kei to commit seppuku by harvesting his consciousness with Soul Killer. Finally, Shaitan's vendetta had actually led him to destroying something Saburo couldn't replace: his son. Though the full importance of this fact was something Shaitan wouldn't realize until years later. Following Arasaka's heavy losses by the end of the Fourth Corporate War, Shaitan remained unsatisfied. Saburo and his company were still kicking about, and Shaitan knew it was going to take even more than a bomb in the heart of their company to end the corp he hated once and for all. The only way Shaitan could think to gain even more of an upper hand was installing more Chrome, pushing his mind closer and closer to full cyberpsychosis. Shaitan eventually lost his sense of self, and one day, without remembering how, he woke on a marooned cargo ship in the middle of the ocean, its rudder destroyed by sea mines, making further travel impossible. Luckily, the ship was stocked with literally millions of eddies worth of Militech equipment, giving Shaitan all the gear and time he needed in the world to reflect and work on himself. Quite literally. It was during this time that he realized the only thing he'd taken from Saburo that couldn't simply be rebuilt was his son Kei. And this sparked an even greater focus into just how Shaitan would administer his revenge from here on after. Though it was still many years before he was rescued, time that he mostly used to learn every form of martial art there was, achieving a deep understanding of the interconnectedness between mind, body, spirit, and Chrome. He'd lost to Adam Smasher hand to hand in 2023, and he would never allow it to happen again. Eventually, Shaitan was rescued by a nomadic merchant ship, who took him to the shores of Japan in exchange for the ship's cargo, with the last thing we then know about Shaitan being that he established a huge network of safe houses all across the Pacific Rim, repositioning himself to now strike at what is perhaps implied to be Saburo's other children, though we know by the time of 2077, of course, that they are both still alive. If you've seen Edgerunners, you no doubt know the story of David Martinez, a kid who proved to be one of the most resilient, determined Edgerunners to have ever walked the streets of Night City. I won't recount the tale of Edgerunners in grand detail, that's possibly for another video, but let's look more here at what exactly made David a legend, with the very story of his birth illustrating the circumstances he was born into, but also perhaps poetically implying what he'd go on to become. One evening, when Gloria Martinez was performing surgery in the back of an ambulance, she felt her water break. So she calmly finished up her op, reattaching the shot-off arm of an Edgerunner before asking him to swap seats with her, delivering David there and then herself as the ambulance still sped towards the hospital. David's umbilical cord severed by the mantis blade inside the recently reattached Edgerunner's arm. From that moment onwards, Gloria knew she would do absolutely anything for the betterment of her son, working insanely hard in the years that followed so she could afford to send David to the Arasaka Academy. Growing up in Mega Building H4, David displayed from a young age an extraordinary degree of resilience. Once he was even beaten within an inch of his life by the son of a 6th Streeter. But before David gave in, the 6th Streeter broke his own hand, wailing in front of the whole Mega Building, whilst David, now covered in blood, simply laughed maniacally for about an hour after the event. Yeah, nobody in the building ever touched David after that. The events that followed, we all know well. One day, after driving back from the academy, David and Gloria were caught in a drive-by, and despite her years in the emergency services, Gloria was abandoned by trauma team due to lack of a membership. It was then that David discovered how she'd been affording his school fees, procuring high-level cyberware from patients who die in the back of her ambulance and selling it on the black market. Currently, she had in her possession an experimental Militech Apogee Sandevistan, or at least I'm assuming that it's the same model. I mean, it might be different, but they look very similar. Shortly after this, Gloria passed away from her injuries, and David, hating how powerless he'd been to save her, demands that his Ripperdoc chips him with the Sandevistan, using it to now take revenge on those who'd been bullying him at school, resulting in his quick expulsion. But now being fully unshackled from his former life, it was then that David met Lucy, catching her as she attempted to pickpocket him before offering to actually help her with his superhuman speed. The two appeared to grow close and ended up going back to Lucy's apartment where they discussed the dream she's always had of going to the moon. But her openness with him appears to not have been entirely truthful, as later that night she calls over her Edgerunner crew to swipe the Sandevistan back, originally intended for their leader Maine. But when David explains that he's Gloria's son and demonstrates an exceptional level of tolerance for his high-powered implants, they give him the chance to join the crew. Thus began David's ascension to Night City legend. He proved himself to be a worthy and valuable member of the Edgerunners crew and was officially inducted swiftly, only for it to prove to be a life laden with even more loss. During the early days, Maine became an inspiration to David, the power afforded by his chrome being something that David too would eventually aspire to, ignoring the negative aspects like the cyberpsychosis that it caused in Maine, which eventually led to his death. After this, it was David that took control of the Edgerunners crew, continuing to hold close Maine's values, not just in spirit, but in body as well. Believing himself to be special, thanks to his tolerance for the Sandevistan, David transformed his build into far more of a tank, implanting gorilla arms, projectile launchers, and more. At this point, people began to describe David as Adam Smasher 2.0, citing similar bodily resilience to the extensive levels of chrome. Unlike Smasher, however, David proved to still have an ounce of humanity, which ultimately would spark his downfall, but also perhaps the salvation of the one he loved the most. After David killed a woman who reminded him of his mother during an op, his overdue spiral into cyberpsychosis would begin, with David warned that overuse of his chrome could only now lead him to death. And yet, even still, he kept going. Later, when Lucy is kidnapped, David's body is pushed to even greater limits as he's forced to don Militech's cyberskeleton, a feat going beyond even that of V. With this, David was now capable of wiping out an entire force of Militech soldiers with utter ease, before pressing onwards to Arasaka Tower to rescue Lucy, his love for her being the only thread of sanity that he had left. After getting Lucy out of the tower, David finally meets one of the only people who could possibly match him. him. As Adam Smasher descended into the city center, David knew the only way he was going to afford Lucy enough time to escape was to face the full Borg. But David quickly proves to be no match for Arasaka's specialist unit, as Smasher swiftly rips apart the cyberskeleton, before offering David one final shot at life.
You know, you could prove an interesting construct.
Whatever, Choom. Like I give a shit.
Oh, well.
Once again, just like when he was a kid, rather than begging or screaming in the face of death, David chose to disregard it with an uncaring shrug. And I feel like we, the audience, care more about his death than he does. Yet, that's also something to ultimately love about him. The tearful part comes when Lucy finally travels to the moon, alone, returning afterwards to Night City's columbarium, buying a plaque to memorialize David with the words, "You didn't take me to the moon, but you were there with me." Yeah, I'm not crying, you're crying. 1 year after these events, in 2077, and David is still fondly remembered as a legend. His drink can be ordered at the Afterlife, something involving blue curacao by the looks, and we can obtain his jacket as a means of remembrance too. That one feels like more something for us the player rather than V though. Of all the legends on this list, David Martinez no doubt encapsulates the blaze of glory life the best. And whilst other legends stuck around for decades sometimes, David's stints only ran for about a year. Now, we could criticize this and say his recklessness needlessly led him to an early grave, but that's a key part of who David was. Usually, a high cyberware tolerance would render one a psychopath like Adam Smasher, but it was David's residual humanity that set him apart, that made him willing to lay down his own life to save somebody else, making him forever a bright burning legend who'll be sorely missed in Edge Runners 2. Without question, the most famous cyberpunk legend not featured in Cyberpunk 2077, and honestly barely mentioned when we account for his fame, is Morgan Blackhand. Not only regarded by most as the best solo to have ever lived, but serving as a shining example for all other solos to follow. Just like Johnny Silverhand, Blackhand served in the Central American War, where he met a number of other skilled individuals and forged contacts that later would come in handy for larger ops. This will prove to be another core strength of Blackhand, a solo that excels both alone and in a team. One of those people he formed a lasting friendship with was a field medic named Mike McRae, who amputated Morgan's right arm when it was shattered during the war, the event that led him to becoming known as Morgan Blackhand. That's two legends now, named after missing arms. After the war ended and Blackhand returned home though, he struggled to get any kind of regular job. Obviously, he was a highly skilled individual, it's just that all those skills happened to involve fighting or killing. But after a few months, in an ironically fortuitous turn of events, Morgan was assaulted by a booster lord. Though insanely skilled solo that he was, he flatlined the guy with little trouble. And as it turns out, a Militech recruiter had borne witness to the whole thing, dropping a business card right there at Morgan's feet. From that point onward, Morgan's main gig would be specialist mercenary ops for Militech, though he was also known to serve as a bodyguard for a techie named Dexter Dobbs, and here Morgan proved his value not just as a protector, but again as a teacher, showing Dexter some self-defense moves so that the man could better defend himself as well, providing a level of service well beyond what you'd probably expect from a cyberpunk merc. Grateful, Dobbs then helped out in tuning Blackhand's gear for years afterwards, and this theme of teaching as well as protecting was something that would continue with Blackhand, leading him to publish the Enforcer's Handbook, which by 2020 had sold over 1 million copies, containing such useful information that it's said to have improved the entire solo profession. It also, of course, gave a tremendous boost to Morgan's street cred. In 2019, Blackhand would prove his superior skills yet again by thwarting an attempted kidnapping of fellow NC legend Kerry Eurodyne, who himself is certainly down the lower end when it comes to combat prowess. What was most surprising about this encounter, however, was that Blackhand didn't kill any of the 5 kidnappers, rather just incapacitated each of them before handing them over to the federal authorities with nothing but a few bruises. He could have simply done away with them, but instead chose mercy with a large side of embarrassment. And who do we know that is disgusted by mercy?
You spend so very human and disgusting. Mercy is disgusting.
Yep, Adam Smasher, whose polar opposite approach made him a natural nemesis to Morgan Blackhand, alongside the fact that Smasher believes everything could be fixed with more chrome, whereas Blackhand referred to rely on his more natural skills. This challenged Smasher's view that metal is better than meat, and Smasher issued challenges to Morgan Blackhand on multiple occasions, each of which were ignored. If you want a more detailed character breakdown of Adam Smasher, by the way, then check out the final chapter of my video, The Hidden Secrets of All Main Bosses in Cyberpunk 2077. However, whilst Morgan Blackhand may have been the arch-nemesis of Adam Smasher, Blackhand himself had a different greatest nemesis, another Arasaka operative who became the full-time bodyguard to Saburo's granddaughter Michiko, named Kenichi Saburo, renowned for being one of the greatest swordsmen in the world. And he's often regarded as the only solo who could truly go toe-to-toe with Morgan Blackhand and not only come out alive, like Andrew Weyland for instance, but also match Blackhand's speed and skill. During the time of the Fourth Corporate War, Blackhand was recruited by Militech to lead the Open War Special Ops team, providing him a tremendous level of funding on the understanding that Morgan's skill would prove even more invaluable. This gave Blackhand the chance to subcontract a team of many brilliant operatives, most of whom he'd previously worked with. Militech also, however, didn't trust Blackhand fully, making him work alongside one of their most loyal solos called Anastasia Lucchesi, who was under special orders to remove the guy if he began to threaten Militech's campaign. But understanding just how impossible that would prove for her, she resorted to seduce him instead. Whether or not she succeeded is never made clear, but regardless, Militech never needed to employ that contingency, at least not as far as we know. Arasaka also recognized Blackhand as a particular threat during this time, with a specific goal to terminate or remove him, though they acknowledged that Blackhand wasn't the type to sell out to the highest bidder, nor would it be at all easy to kill him. That's literally one of the most powerful megacorporations in the world, acknowledging the threat posed to them by a single man. I mean, that's some John Wick level shit. And Morgan's prowess, both as a leader and a solo, would culminate with the fall of Arasaka Tower in 2023, the fourth time we visited this event in this video. But this time, we'll be following Strike Team Omega, as opposed to Strike Team Alpha, which was Johnny and crew rescuing Alt. Now, this was a regular tactic of Blackhand's, to delegate the squad into smaller teams, whilst he would provide support where needed most. Officially, they were there to back Johnny up and provide support where needed, part of which would involve taking out a laser array, attempting to back up data from the tower, though Blackhand was also seen at one point heading downstairs with a large suitcase. So he wasn't necessarily the one that actually planted the bomb, he just probably was. Again, that whole bit with Johnny and the flashback is almost like Silverhand's stolen Morgan's memory. After things went south, retrieving Alt, Silverhand was killed and the rest fled with Shaitan holding off Smasher, the survivors began to evacuate on the rooftop. But before Morgan Blackhand could get away, he was held back by the borged up voice of Adam Smasher, who appeared on the rooftop, now holding the biopod head of Shaitan. That's the brain and spinal column, the only human part left when somebody goes full Borg, and it was all that Shaitan needed to remain alive. Taunting Blackhand with the news that Silverhand was dead, and the threat that Shaitan would soon be too, Morgan chose to try and save his fellow solo, heroically telling the others to get the hell out of there, with Blackhand promising to be along in a minute, before finally indulging Smasher's request to see if metal really was better than meat. The two then fought atop the tower, right up to the point that it collapsed. Now, we know for sure that Smasher and Shaitan both survived, but as for Blackhand, that remains a deliberate mystery. Theories and potential sightings have abounded over the years, rumors growing that Blackhand had returned to President Elizabeth Kress, informing her of events at the tower, but ultimately, far as we know, there have been no confirmed official sightings of Morgan Blackhand since the tower fell. In 2077, at the Afterlife, all that's said on the matter is this.
Who else can I drink here?
All on the menu. Except there's a spot missing. Morgan Blackhand, right?
It's true. Morgan's yet to make up his mind if he's dead or still kicking.
Nobody knows what happened to him. Think he's still alive? It's been years.
Why not? Look at Rogue. Peaked from that era, a species unto themselves.
Now, it's pretty much certain that Morgan Blackhand isn't dead. In fact, Mike Pondsmith has literally come out and said, "Me and my opposite number at CDPR, Patrick, are planning a whole crazy backstory about what Morgan has been doing since the nuke." So yeah, it seems very likely that he'll be cropping up either in Orion or definitely some form of Cyberpunk media at some point in the future. For now, the only other hint at a Blackhand sighting is the game's WNS News website, reporting on a shootout in Japantown which killed a number of Lazarus agents, with the sole survivor claiming the attacker to be a portly man with a black cyberarm. Likely just a tiny nod and reward for those who read the in-game websites. To say Morgan Blackhand is the ultimate Night City legend would probably be fair, and in a world where many might think great power can only be achieved by chroming oneself to cyberpsychosis, David, Blackhand is living proof, or probably living proof, that with pure training and skill, not to mention the ability to manage a great team, meat can indeed still be better than metal. But there's still of course one legend who absolutely would be able to rival most of these. But V's rise to power, glory and fame, achieving some of the most legendary feats that Night City has and probably will ever know, is basically just the whole story of Cyberpunk 2077. And if you do want to kick back with a full rundown of that, and maybe Phantom Liberty 2, then I've also done detailed overviews for the plotlines of both the main game and the expansion. If you're noticing the lack of legendary netrunners like Raish Bartmoss and Spider Murphy on this particular list, then that's because I plan to cover all of them together in a separate video. And again, Adam Smasher's lore can be found in my Hidden Secrets of All Main Bosses vid. Please do comment below though who your favourite Night City legend is and why. I'd love to discuss it in the comments some more. Huge thank you as always to the Patreon supporters and channel members for helping to bring you more videos like this, and thank you for watching. I'm Sam Bram, and have a Nova day, Chooms.